Okay, hi again. Let's jump right in. Obviously, as we all know, Hamlet is a lot to cover, so we should start now. Okay, so in this scene, we see Hamlet's best chance to kill Claudius yet, right? So we just saw the play within a play. We just saw Claudius run away. We saw Hamlet rejoice practically that he's gotten the proof that he needs, that this ghost was correct. This is retribution. This is vengeance. This is righteously done. And so he comes up into the hallway, or he's going not the hallway. He's on his way to see his mother, and he sees Claudius prone. He sees him praying, and he draws his sword to kill him, and then he decides, no, if he's in prayer, when I kill him, his soul will go to heaven. So he vows that he's going to kill him in a moment of sin, while he's committing a sin, so his soul will be damned. So I think now is a great time to talk about Hamlet's indecision in this play and lack of action. Not only is the play Hamlet very long, it's the longest of Shakespeare's plays. In fact, the action is also really drawn out, which mirrors, of course, the plot and the way that Hamlet chooses to go about his revenge. So by now, Hamlet could have killed Claudius and lots of times, if he'd done that instead of tricking people into thinking that he's nuts. So why hasn't he? I'm sure that's a question a lot of you have been wondering yourself. Well, for one, he's putting on this antic disposition. He can get away with a lot more because people will chalk it up to his madness, brought on by, whatever reason they decide that it is. There certainly are plenty. He can insult anyone. He's like a fool in that way, right? He can say whatever he wants. And he can speak the truth, even to power. And almost maybe even more importantly than this, people will underestimate him, right? Two, he was afraid up until this point that the ghost was lying, hence the play and the judging of his uncle's response and all that, and we went over that. And three, he's been trained very well to reason at Wittenberg, and he's putting all of that reason to the test, doing the classic overthinking that I think we're all guilty of, So these are three explanations, possible explanations, partial reasons why this is going on, or perhaps he's indecisive, He's definitely overthinking it. That's 100% true. Perhaps it's because he's, just straight up one of the most complicated characters in literature, and that's why we're still studying him. Amazing. Maybe that's it. All right. So, Act 3, Scene 4, after not killing Claudius, who, by the way, could not seem to pray, which falls in line very much with Macbeth, didn't it? Not being able to say amen. These guilty people not being able to pray. Now we find ourselves in Gertrude's private chambers, which is a really weird place for a mother and son. This, coupled with his obsession with his mom's new marriage and calling her a whore, kind of gives rise to the scholarship on Hamlet having an Oedipus complex, being a little bit too into his mom and her affairs. So that's one take on this whole scene. But to start from the top, Polonius hides behind a curtain to spy, because that's his bread and butter, is spying on people. Hamlet comes in really aggressively and suddenly, and it startles Gertrude, and she calls out for help. She's like, oh my gosh, you scared me. That happens to me constantly. I'm constantly being startled by human beings that I already know are there. But anyway, she cries out. Polonius hears her cry out. He cries out. Hamlet stabs him through the curtain, dead for a ducat, thinking that he's Claudius. And you can see obviously here that Hamlet's indecision is gone. And he's like, no, now, except no, you didn't kill your evil stepdad. You killed your ex-girlfriend's pops. Anyway, right after that, Hamlet verbally, assaults his mother, and once more, he, just like with Ophelia, he won't stop with the actors. He won't stop. He's got lots to say. Lots and lots to say. Mid-tirade, the ghost appears, though. And to remind him of his real purpose, which was to avenge his father. And, kind of be like, hint, hint, remember I told you not to be a jerk to your mom. Very specifically said that. But Gertrude, she can't see the ghost, and so, of course, she just continues to think that her son's insane. Oh, heaven help him, all that. And he's like, I'm not insane, because I can repeat everything that was just said in this room as a bit of proof of his cognitive sense, and his awareness of his surroundings kind of thing. And, to reveal his true self to his mother. He's like, no, I'm not crazy. I know I've been acting like it. That's on purpose. And then he continues to lay into her. He tells her, don't sleep with Claudius anymore. Act like you have virtue. Assume a virtue if you have it not. Don't let him ply you for information. He tells her that he knows Claudius is going to send him to England, and he thinks it's a plot to get rid of him. A plot that he intends to respond to with violence. Second half of this play, thinking Hamlet has, everything we literally just discussed has kind of gone a little bit out the window, to an extent. This is Hamlet, a man of action now. You'll see things start happening much more swiftly in the second half of the play because of Hamlet's decision to change course and the way that he decides to respond from this point going forward. This Hamlet right here has a taste for blood now. There we go. Here in our little comic has a taste for blood now. And at the end of the scene, he drags Polonius' body away. So things probably aren't going to get better between him and Ophelia. Just hazarding, I guess. Anyway, here's a quick scene. Act 4, Scene 1. This is where Claudius is saying, oh my gosh, Polonius is dead, and I'm super worried that I'm going to get blamed for that, for letting that crazy young man run around willy-nilly. And so, yeah. Moving on. Okay, so Rosencrantz and Guildenstern bring Hamlet to the king, where the king asks, hey, where's Polonius? And Hamlet's like, at supper. At supper where? Not where he eats, but where he is eaten. Hamlet's getting, perhaps, if possible, even darker with his wordplay, and he goes on about maggots and how even kings pass through worms. Worms that are used to catch fish, so that a king can pass through the entrails of a beggar if a beggar catches a fish. Yum. Circle of Life. Reminds me of the poem Ode to the Maggot by Yusuf Komunyaka. It's a very good modern poem. Anyway, super off track. Claudius repeats himself again. He says, where is Polonius? Hamlet now says, in heaven. Send thither to see. If your messenger doesn't find him there, seek him in the other place. Seek him in the other place yourself, which is, snappy Shakespeare for go to hell, which you already figured out, because you guys so bright. After which, his whole, being a jerk thing, which he's really good at, he does tell him where to find him, but also indirectly. And he's like, but if you don't find him within a month, you'll smell him under the stairs. Super gross. Claudius is like, dude, I gotta send you away for this. And Hamlet's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Bye, Mom. Then, Claudius reveals on stage, alone to us, the audience, that he is sending Hamlet off to his death. Which we can't do that. We saw that coming. Okay, so Act 4, Scene 4, super brief. We're just going to skip over tons of Fortinbras because everybody does. No, I'm just kidding. But Hamlet and Fortinbras meet, both going through Denmark, both on the way out, one on his way to Poland and one on his way to England. And Hamlet is inspired by Fortinbras and resolves himself again to bloody action. So it's like, ooh, cool, thanks, Forty, for, instilling that fire in our Great Dane's belly, right? Okay, so now we are going to talk about Ophelia. In this scene, we see a new look for our leading lady. She's certainly been through a lot in this play, and her madness is very much in stark contrast to Hamlet's. Wouldn't you think? Or wouldn't you say, don't you think? I'd love to talk to her. I'd love to talk to her. I'd love to talk about her for a minute, though. Hope that's okay. All right? Cool. So, for a character that only appears in 5 scenes of a play, she has fascinated and endured in paintings and songs, books, spin-off plays, essays, all sorts of artistic renderings of her have abounded for centuries. Fun fact, aside from Juliet, she is the most referenced of Shakespeare's heroines in art, literature, and pop culture, and definitely the most frequently of the 2 ladies to be represented by herself, as Juliet is most commonly depicted with Romeo, as you guys are aware, I'm sure. In Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, the stage direction that a woman enters with disheveled hair like Ophelia does in this scene indicates that she might be either mad or the victim of a rape. The disordered hair, her offense against decorum suggests sensuality in any case. Doesn't in both cases, that's kind of what they both have in common, is this addressing of women breaking social norms. The wildflowers in her hair that are talked about in the play quite a bit also indicate madness and sensuality. Like, again, this wild spirit, this wildness that is no longer being cloistered in the way that society, her father, her brother, decorum might dictate. She's also usually in productions dressed in white, which is obviously, in contrast to Hamlet's black. And she comes in here and she sings dirty songs that she shouldn't know, right? Songs about people, who've been abandoned. The songs are about people who've been left. But their body, they're dirty, It definitely, could indicate, it's a possibility that perhaps she has had a sexual relationship with Hamlet. She serves as the prototype for classical female hysteria, which is, like a beautiful, tragic heroine that is picturesque even in death. She foils, obviously, as I've touched on, Hamlet's masculine insanity with the idea of this feminine madness. It's a term called erotomania. And did I fly right past it? Oh, yeah, here we go. Erotomania. Female love melancholy, brought on by unrequited love. The remedy for erotomania was a swift marriage before a young woman killed herself, usually via drowning. Around 1580, melancholy, like Hamlet's, was very fashionable as far as diseases go, among young men, especially in London. But melancholy is associated with intelligence and imagination, and like we see in Hamlet, like this man who's so very intelligent, so very thoughtful that he can't possibly think of the world in any positive terms. He just knows too much. He can think too much. He has too much reason to be happy, But female madness, on the other hand, was considered too much ruled by emotion to be a malady that was part sadness and part great insight, right? That's where the word hysteria comes from, but it comes from the same root as hysterectomy. It's rooted in the idea of the feminine, like feminine crazy, But the idea being that they were too emotional. Women were considered, very unfortunately and very incorrectly, to be considered lower than men on the totem pole of the hierarchy of human existence, and so they weren't believed to be capable of mentally sustaining such a trying conditions that would evoke melancholy. Seemed to be the much frailer, delicate, more gentle, easily breakable sex. To jump forward just a bit, the next time we hear about Ophelia, she has drowned. This works symbolically, of course, as it is a submersion in the female element associated with female fluidity and constancy. It's nonviolent and beautiful in literature, and it's symbolic of being, well, inundated, overwhelmed by the world of men. Laertes says later, we'll touch on it, that the feminine, i.e. his tears, will be done and gone once he finishes crying for her, and he'll be able to continue on his masculine revenge mission. The tears are feminine for being water, as well as for showing emotion in weakness. Too much water hast thou, poor Ophelia, and therefore I forbid my tears. It is our trick, nature her own custom holds. Let shame say what it will, when these are gone, the woman will be put out. So to have too much water, to be overly phlegmatic, as we touched on in week 1 as one of our humors, might be to be too passive-aggressive, quiet, shy, overly accepting, among other things, all of which Ophelia definitely had in spades before going mad. To some extent, we can kind of see her as the crazy ex-girlfriend trope, right? That's just one way that this character type, these ideas are still around. They've just evolved as time has gone by. So if think about some of the contemporary examples of the crazy ex-girlfriend, and how do they either conform or combat this archetype? How have they changed? How have our depictions of female insanity as well changed since Shakespeare's day? Things to make you go, as my dad would say. As to the rest of that scene, Laertes comes storming back from France, livid with Claudius, ready to kill him. "Oh, thou vile king, give me my father." Claudius uses his tricky, slippery language to talk him out of killing him. He kind of, in his speech, invokes the divine right of kings, that he's protected by God himself. And he manages to convince Laertes that he has to kill Hamlet to get his revenge. And amidst all of this manly talk of revenge, re-enters the mad Ophelia, which breaks her brother's heart. She hands out flowers in symbolic, suggestive meanings that we touched on a little bit. More on, represent madness, represent sensuality, and the flowers also represent different things to the characters that she gives them to, which is cool. Hopefully there's notes about that in your text. Before moving on, it's also worth noting that Laertes functions as a bit of a foil for Hamlet too. Everybody in this play is compared against Hamlet at some point. But he is also a son who is bent on revenge for the death of his father. So it's a very obvious parallel between the two of them. But it also shows the futility. It highlights the futility of it, because Laertes will lose everything just before Hamlet does. And it also shows us what's in store for our prince. So we see Horatio next, reading a letter from Hamlet that says that his ship was run into by pirates, and that Hamlet boarded the pirate ship and offered himself as their only prisoner, and the ship he was on kept on going to England, and he was on the pirate ship. What? Okay, so now we get some serious action in this play, and we don't even get to see it. Come on. Why would this work in a play? Why put this here? Why? I'm not saying there's an answer, by the way. I'm just saying that's what everybody else is asking. Side note about pirates. Pirates were a very serious thing at the time. Not that, we think of them differently now, but that it was a serious concern, and a Danish ship traveling to England might very well get taken by pirates. The seas were the highways of the time, and where trade occurred, where the goods were found were on these ships, and pirates, that's an entire class in and of itself, pirates in the Caribbean. But not unrealistic, super cool, don't have time to talk about it, I guess. Anyway, so, by the way, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are taking Hamlet to England. Whoop, I guess this is them taking Hamlet to England. This is my pantomime. So he's like, oh, by the way, they're still going to England, where I didn't go. I'm not gonna go. Heads up, I'm coming home. Horatio, look out. Boom. So that was the entirety of that scene. Pirates that we don't get to see. So, next, Act 4, Scene 7, Claudius comes in and tells Laertes that Hamlet is on his way back, and that Laertes must trust Claudius in their plan against Hamlet. Laertes is like, okay, but you don't seem to take direct action against him at all. This is like straight up all on me, according to you. And Claudius is like, that's because of how much his mom loves him, and you know how much I love her. I cannot be the one to kill him or do anything like that because it would destroy her, and I can't do that. And also, he's super popular with the people. It would be a disaster for my reign. It's got to be you, buddy. It's an interesting point here. Gertrude seems to inspire very great love in the men in her life. You know, Hamlet wouldn't be so angry if he didn't love her so. His father, the ghost, talks of how much he loved Gertrude. And Claudius has fallen so very deeply for her. So, something there, huh? How do you wrap that into the character? That's definitely something to be taken into consideration, you know. Moving on. Laertes is being so easily manipulated by Claudius here. Just like everybody else. Just like everybody else. Except for Hamlet. But in this case, it's specifically because Laertes' rage is blinding him, you know. Claudius tells him, we'll make your sword unbaited in the match, aka unblunted. As they should be blunted for a sparring match, obviously they shouldn't be super sharp. But we will. And also, we'll poison it! Oh, and I'll put poison in a cup of wine out too, in case you fail. That way, I can be like, hey, Hamlet, good job with your victory, don't you want some wine? And I'll give it to him. And that way we'll kill him 3 times over. Make sure he did. The next is another very famous scene that has a nickname, the Gravedigger scene, the graveyard scene. It functions a bit like the Gravedigger functions a bit like Feste does in Twelfth Night. He's a very clever fool of a character. But of course, the subject matter is much, much darker. So, let's dig in! Buns. I can't help it. In Quarto 2, and in the folio version of Hamlet, the stage direction says, enter 2 clowns, by the way, which indicates that both of these men talking in the beginning were comedic actors. The Gravedigger and the one other are talking about how Ophelia committed suicide and doing quite a bit of, silly wordplay and twisting of logic to explain how she could still be considered to have not killed herself, Perhaps the water attacked her, etc., etc. And the second character says it quite plainly, exactly what they're talking about. When he says, she's still getting a Christian burial because she comes from a wealthy family. If she were a common woman, she wouldn't get one. Which is true. I can't recall if we touched on this or not. Ooh. But you don't get if you commit suicide, that's a sin against yourself, and you wouldn't get a Christian burial at the time for doing that. So there's the argument that's being made here is that she did, like, no, she didn't kill herself because then she can't get buried, then she can't go to heaven, that kind of thing. I also think there's an interesting point here about the way that people talk about one another when they know nothing about them. These 2 clowns aren't wrong about Ophelia. There's a solid chance she did kill herself. Not even, the audience, not even we get to know for sure, because Gertrude is the one who tells us, and even she got it secondhand, and Gertrude certainly doesn't want it to be true that she killed herself, so, yeah. But she gets the funeral because she was the daughter of a wealthy, upper-class man. But she also gets discussed in the same earthly manner that the Gravedigger discusses everybody else, Whose funeral is this? A man? No. A woman? No. One that was a woman. Anyway, eventually, Hamlet enters. He's returned from his trip, he said farewell to his new pirate friends, and he comes upon the gravedigger singing as he digs, which, of course, this is fascinating for Hamlet. If we know anything about him by now, we know he's obsessed with death. So he's just like, oh my gosh, so excited. This man, does he know what his job is, to be singing at it like this? And Horatio, ever the stoic, says, well, it's become second nature to him. Hamlet agrees. Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. That's true. And reflects upon that. And then the gravedigger throws up a skull. And our depressed, morbid Hamlet, he picks it up. And here we have a famous image from this play that you see everywhere of Hamlet holding the skull. Ooh. Hamlet holding the skull. Which, by the way, Hamlet doesn't hold the skull in his to be or not to be speech. This is the scene that he holds it in. You see a lot of people doing that. Why is my screen changing over and over? Ooh, come back. Okay. Anyway, that's just a little pet peeve of mine. It happens here. It doesn't happen with to be or not to be. Anyway. He also says that the skull does not have a jawbone. He specifically calls it chapless. Chapless. But that's me getting picky. Although any other, Shakespearean actor or scholar will say the same thing. So anyway, Hamlet picks up the skull. He's fascinated by the possibilities. This skull once had a tongue in it. Maybe it was a courtier or a politician. It spoke once. And now the gravedigger tosses him about. Did these bones cost no more the breeding, but to play a game with them? Like pieces of wood in a game? My own bones ache to think this. Hamlet is fascinated at this point, wrapped up in the consequences of time and death, and he speaks to the gravedigger. He's like, I'll speak to him. Whose grave is this? And the gravedigger says, it's mine. Hamlet is great, of course, because he plays along. He says, I think it must be because you're lying in it. And the gravedigger says, you lie out of it, so it can't be yours. Meanwhile, I'm not lying in it, and yet it's mine, because I'm the gravedigger. And Hamlet says, no, you do lie in it, because you said it was yours, and it's not because you're alive, so you're lying in the grave. So, okay, fine. Whose is it? One, and then, the one that was a woman, sir. And here's a sick, terrible moment of dramatic irony, because this whole time, we've known that this is Ophelia's grave, and we're like, oh my gosh, what is Hamlet going to do when he finds out? He doesn't know. He doesn't know at all. He's picking up skulls, talking to the dirt, and Horatio, and he doesn't even know that Ophelia's dead, let alone that this is her funeral. So, super fun time, dramatic irony, joking about next to his dead girlfriend's grave. Meanwhile, the gravedigger doesn't know who he's talking to either, even while he's talking about him. Hamlet, who went mad and was sent to England. Why was he sent to England? Why, because he's crazy. He'll recover his wits there, and if he doesn't, it doesn't matter, because there are tons of crazy people in England. This play is being performed in England. They jest around some more before the gravedigger gives him a skull and says, this has been in the ground for about 23 years, and tells him it was the court jester, Yorick. Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio! Well, we've heard that line. We've heard that line. In fact, I have a t-shirt that says, alas, poor Yorick, he was my Facebook friend, Horatio. Anyway. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath bore me on his back 1,000 times, etc., etc. Where be your jibes now? You look quite chapfallen. A.k.a. his jawbone is missing. And goes on and on about more about death and about the difference between the alive and the dead, and just it's all wrapped up. Death, time, decay, all of this together. And then the funeral procession comes in, with Laertes and Gertrude and Claudius, and a flourish of other people, a funeral procession. And Laertes is mad that Ophelia isn't getting a full service, and the Doctor of Divinity says, we are already doing as much of the ceremony as her actions can allow. You're lucky that the order of the king overrules the church in this, otherwise we wouldn't be. So Laertes is forced to accept this, and says, fine, then lay her in the earth gently, and may violets spring from her innocent self. My sister will be an angel when you're howling in hell, churchman. He's super mad. He's super mad. And now Hamlet realizes who it is. And Gertrude says, "Sweet girl, I had hoped you'd be my Hamlet's wife." And then, overcome with grief, Laertes jumps down into her grave with his sister, and says, "Hang on, don't pour dirt on her just yet. Let me hold her one more time. Pour the dirt on me. I want to die with her." It's a terribly touching moment. And it's right now that Hamlet decides to make himself known. "It is I, Hamlet the Dane! You think you're sad about it. I'm sadder than 1,000,000,000 brothers could ever be. Come at me, brah." Or something. And they fight. Laertes and Hamlet go at each other. Right there. They have to be separated. Right there at Ophelia's funeral. And he's like, "What are you going to do, Laertes? Whatever it is, I'll outdo you. I'll out bemoan you even. I'll out mourn you. I'll out fight you. Bring it." And, it obviously draws the question, is he actually sad? Is he actually upset about Ophelia? What is happening here? Is Hamlet actually crazy? Is there still method in his madness? Or is he just going a little bit ballistic? All up to interpretation. All up to the actors. Very, very interesting, very dynamic scene. I'm getting all worked up. Okay, so Act 5, Scene 2, the very final scene of the play. Hamlet is calm once more. We just saw him in this massive rage, in this massive fit of trying to outdo Horatio at being sad about his sister's funeral, and just, the fighting and the anger and everything, and then now we come to this final scene and he's calm once more, and he's revealing to Horatio how he discovered the plot against his life, and how he turned the tables on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and had them executed in his place. He opened the seal and scraped off his own name and wrote their name in instead, and sealed it back up and sent them on their way to be executed upon immediate opening of the letter. And Horatio says, "What a king is this?" Which is a fantastic question. What kind of ruler would do that? What kind of person would do that? And it also brings up another good question, which is, since when does Hamlet want to be king? Since when are we even talking about Hamlet as a king? And then right after that, we see Hamlet describe Claudius, and it's the very first time he himself says anything about those sorts of ambitions. He says, "He that hath killed my king and whored my mother popped in between the election and my hopes." Since when was this true? We knew that he was a scholar. He went to Wittenberg. He had aspirations of going back. He wanted to go back. He only stayed because his mother asked him to. But now we see Hamlet saying something completely different. What we know for certain is that he's changed a lot since his time at sea, for sure. So then Osric comes in and says there is to be a sword fight between him and Laertes, and that the king has bet on Hamlet to win, so he has to do it. Horatio thinks that Laertes will win, that he's the better sword fighter, and Hamlet insists that while Laertes has been idle in France, he himself has kept in constant training. But then Hamlet confesses that he's sick at heart, and he has a bad feeling about the fight. Horatio says, "Well, listen to that feeling. We can stall the fight." But Hamlet's not having that. He says, well, he will not kill himself. He is ready to die should death come. And then at this point, all the other characters enter with a flourish. A table is prepared. Gertrude, Claudius, Laertes, any number of courtiers, trumpets, drums, fifes, officers, all pour onto the stage. And this quiet stage between two friends with just Horatio and Hamlet is gone, and the end is swiftly coming. So at this point, Hamlet gives a very gracious apology to Laertes. He says, "This presence knows, you must needs have heard, how I am punished with sore distraction. What I have done that might your nature, honor, and exception roughly awake, I here proclaim is madness. Was it Hamlet wronged Laertes? No, never Hamlet." He's saying, He's saying it wasn't me that would do this. I would never do this to you. It was madness. Hamlet from himself be taken away, and when he's not himself, does wrong Laertes. Then Hamlet does it not. Hamlet denies it. Who does it then? His madness. If it be so, Hamlet is of the faction that is wronged. His madness is poor Hamlet's enemy. Sir, in this audience let my disclaiming from a purposed evil free me so far in your generous thoughts, that I have shot mine arrow o'er the house and hurt my brother. He's saying I couldn't be more at fault for this than if it were a pure accident, than if I had shot an arrow over a house and hit my brother with it. It was never my aim to hurt you, or or your family or anything like that. It was this sickness, this madness in me. So, first of all, we need to think at this moment. Okay, well, you said you were faking the madness, but there've definitely been moments where we've questioned it. Where is Hamlet now? Is he sitting in a moment of sobriety? Is he lucid? What do you make of this speech here? And more importantly, perhaps, how does Laertes feel at this point, knowing that he's about to kill Hamlet 3 times over? He says, to him, he says, my feelings on this are satisfied with an apology, even though my father's murder and my sister's death should drive me to revenge. But when it comes to my honor, I have no choice, until those wiser than I can show me a way to forgive you without staining my honor. But until that time comes, I'll take your offer of love as just that, as an offer of love. And Hamlet says, I get it. Let's do this. No prob. He appreciates his understanding, accepts his response, and says, cool, let's fight. He calls for the swords, and it's a spectacular sword fight. It goes on throughout the scene. Hamlet gets hit first, and as promised, Claudius drinks from the goblet of wine to Hamlet's health. Then he drops a pearl into it, and he offers it. He says, this pearl for you, Hamlet, And Hamlet says, let me finish the round first. And Hamlet hits Horatio. Not Horatio. That would be terrible. Hamlet hits Laertes again. Claudius is like, oh my gosh, he's going to win. Gertrude speaks up and says, no, he's flabby and sweating. Here, Hamlet, take my handkerchief. The queen drinks to your good luck. And then she takes this poisoned goblet and drinks from it. Claudius says, no, don't do that, tries to stop her, but she does it anyway. Why doesn't Claudius try harder? Or maybe he does. How do you stage this here? And what does Gertrude know? What is her motivation? Is she just drinking out of a glass of wine? Because it's a winner's cup. It's set aside specifically for Hamlet. Does she know what's happening? Is this her out? Or, is she doing this completely unwittingly? These are definitely questions to keep in mind when you are painting the full picture of her character. Anyway, Laertes says he's going to get Hamlet now. He's going to do it, but he almost feels guilty for it, and he does. He says, "Have at you," and stabs him, pricks him with his sword, and then Hamlet gets him back, gets that third hit to defeat Laertes. But now we know that Hamlet's been nicked. Hamlet's bleeding, and we know he's as good as dead at this point. We all knew it was coming, but did you? How many of you were expecting this? How many did you feel the tension in this scene as it's drawing to a close? Knowing everything that I've said about how tragedies end, it still gets me each time. I would love to hear your thoughts in the discussion board. Then at this point, the queen collapses just when Hamlet is trying to keep the match going, and she cries out that she's poisoned. She's dying. How does she know this? But at this point, Laertes also reveals that not only did he poison his sword and clip Hamlet with it, but he's been undone by his own treachery, because at some point in the match, they accidentally switched swords. And Hamlet has now nicked Laertes too. And as he's lying here dying, he reveals it all. That's also kind of an embedded stage direction, right? Because up until this point, we didn't necessarily know that they'd switched swords. So when you stage this, that has to happen. And you as a director, you have to decide, do you want it to be this big moment where we as the audience notice it, and we all know it's coming? Or does it strike us as a surprise too, as Laertes reveals it to Hamlet? Anyway, realizing that he is out of time and that he's dying, this has finally put the gumption in Hamlet for sure, and he leaps at Claudius and wounds him with his sword. And Claudius cries out that he's merely hurt, but Hamlet forces him to drink the rest of the poison wine that he set out and tells him, "Follow my mother." And finally, at this point, Claudius does die. And so now we have Laertes and Hamlet on the stage, dying, and Laertes tells Hamlet that he's justly served, and the two of them forgive each other. And Laertes says, "Exchange forgiveness with me, noble Hamlet. Mine and my father's death come not upon thee, nor thine on me." And Hamlet says, "Heaven make thee free of it. I follow thee. I am dead, Horatio. Wretched queen, adieu. You that look pale and tremble at this chance, that are but mutes or audience to this act. Had I but time! Ah, this fell Sergeant Death is strict in his arrest. Oh, I could tell you, but let it be. Horatio, I am dead. Thou livest. Report me in my cause all right to be unsatisfied." So Hamlet is, bemoaning like, "Oh, if I only had time. I have so much more left to say, to think about, to do." We know, buddy, we know. You've been saying, doing, and thinking constantly for the last 5 acts. But he finally sets it aside, and he tells Horatio, you live. Tell my story. Tell my story to those who don't know. But Horatio wants to kill himself too. He says he's more antique Roman than Dane, which is a reference to, in ancient Rome, suicide was a noble option, which echoes Hamlet's potential argument back in his to be or not to be speech that we talked about. As well as Antony, from Antony and Cleopatra, which is another play by Shakespeare. But Hamlet begs him to stay alive. He says, "In this harsh world, draw thy breath and pain to tell my story." And Horatio agrees to do this for his friend. So Osric, the messenger, comes back in and says that Fortinbras, victorious in Poland, has returned to the castle and is now here in Denmark. But Hamlet is nearing the end. He doesn't have much left. And here he prophesies that Fortinbras will become the king of Norway, and that he supports it, and says, "Tell Fortinbras what happened, Horatio." And then we have these 4 O's. The last thing that Hamlet says is, "Oh, oh, oh, oh," and then he dies. And it's not really clear. Some people say that that's just a stage direction to let people know that Hamlet is making dying sounds. Other people put a lot of emphasis and meaning and thought into those O's, like what are the different things. Now Hamlet is speechless, finally, right here at the end of the play, and all he has left are these exclamations. And what do they mean? What is he realizing? What is he seeing in these last moments of his life that he's contemplated for so long? What comes at the end? And here he is at the very end, and he can't even convey it to us, So that's the very famous final line of Hamlet is just 4 O's. He has such a long dying scene on stage. This man so keenly aware of death, and we do get so much from him before he does finally die on stage. The gun sound off. Fortinbras comes in. Hamlet is dead, and Fortinbras is named king and orders a military funeral for Hamlet. The play comes to an end, and that's it. The rest is silence, and that's enough of my lecture. And I told you that I was going to make it shorter, but I made it longer than the last one by 3 minutes. Maybe not. Anyway, have a nice evening. I'll stop talking. Hey everybody, jumped off a little too fast. I've done that before. I get to the end of the play and then I want to let you go immediately, but I forgot that I have 2 more little slides. So the first one here is a quote that I really like, especially in relation to Hamlet. Don't ask for simple answers from Shakespeare. Just believe in Shakespeare, in his greatness, in his wide outlook, in his ability to put into one play a whole world with all its contradictions, contrasts, and problems. And there certainly are lots of contradictions in this play and lots of questions that go unanswered. And just, the fact that the questions are still there might very well be why we're still reading it. And then this page here is just literally a bunch of goofy things that I had that I couldn't find room for elsewhere, so I stuck them all here at the end. If you have any questions, if you have any cool thoughts, you can always email me. You know where my home on the web is. Thank you guys so much.